wow us with brilliance. Stop this, reset this. All right, I'm ready when you are.
All right. I'm Caleb, and I read Lev Vygotsky's Mind and Society, and let me tell you, it's every bit as fun as it sounds. All right, so Lev Vygotsky, obviously, no one really knows who this guy is, right? Anyway, he was born in November 1896, and as you may know, he was a popular Soviet psychologist. Lev Vygotsky, he was born in the town of Orsha, northeast of Minsk in Belarusia. In 1917, after graduating from Moscow University with a specialization in literature, he began his literary research. From 1917 to 1923, Vygotsky taught literature and psychology in the school in Gomel, where he also directed the theater section of the Adult Education Center. He gave many speeches and lectures on problems of literature and science. During this period, Vygotsky founded the literary journal Verst, where he published his first literary research, later reissued as The Psychology of Art. He also founded a psychological laboratory in the Teacher Training Institute, where he gave a course on psychology, the contents of which were later published in Pedagogical Psychology. In 1924, Vygotsky moved to Moscow and began to work at the First Institute of Psychology and then the Institute of Defectology, which he founded. At the same time, he directed the Department of Education for physically defective and mentally retarded children in the Necron Post, also known as the People's Committee on Education, and taught courses in the Krupskaya Academy on Communist Education, the Second Moscow State University, and the Hartson Pedagogical Institute in Leningrad. Between 1925 and 1934, Vygotsky gathered around him a large group of young scientists working in areas of psychology, defectology, and mental abnormality. An interest in medicine led Vygotsky simultaneously to undertake medical training, first in the Medical Institute in Moscow and later in Kharkov, where he gave psychology and course in the Ukrainian Psychoneurological Academy. Not long before his death, Vygotsky was invited to head the Department of Psychology in the All-Union Institute of Experimental Medicine, and he died of tuberculosis on June 11, 1934. That was a lot more information than I thought it was. But yeah, like I said, not really a big guy. A lot of achievements. All right, here we have the table of contents for the book. Like I said, it's every bit as exciting as it sounds. The first thing when you open the book, Vygotsky asks the question, what separates humans from animals? Is it their ability to use tools? Perhaps speech. And is there maybe a relation between speech and the tools, the use of tools? Vygotsky believed heavily in this idea that speech was the key to cognitive development. Mueller interpreted the appearance of practical intelligence in children as being of exactly the same type as those that was familiar in chimpanzees. Mueller designated this phrase the chimpanzee age. The achievements of the chimpanzees are quite independent of language, and in the case of man, even later in life, technical thinking or thinking in terms of tools is far less closely bound up with language and concepts and other forms of thinking. That's by K. Mueller. Throughout most of probably half of this book is a lot of analyzation of Vygotsky, of other researchers' works, and this is part of that. Yame and Meyerson's experiments on tool use among apes support Vygotsky's belief that speech is so key. This is a quote from Vygotsky himself. From their extremely interesting experiments on tools among apes, they concluded that the methods used by apes to accomplish a given task are similar in principle and coincide on certain essential points to those used by people suffering from aphasia. Their findings support my assumption that speech plays an essential role in the organization of higher psychological functions. The relationship between speech and tool use. The social interaction and transformation of practical activity is what this is. The symbolic tool is used to produce new forms of behavior. This is where the difference between the ape intelligence and the human intelligence separates. And although children use tools during their proverbial period, it is comparable to that of apes. And as soon as speech and the use of signs are incorporated into any action, the action becomes transformed and organizes along entirely new ideas. And this makes speech the essence, speech and tool use the essence of complex human behavior. The specifically human capacity for language enables children to provide for auxiliary tools and the solutions of difficult tasks to overcome impulsive action, to plan a solution to a prior problem to its execution, and master their own behavior. W. Stern stated that the recognition of the fact that verbal signs have meaning constitutes the greatest discovery in a child's life. In contrast with adults who react differently to objects and people, young children are likely to fuse action and speech when responding to objects and social beings. And although the practical intelligence and sign use can operate independently of each other in young children, the dialectical unity of these systems in human adults is the very essence of the complex human behavior. Children with the aid of speech create greater possibilities than apes can ever accomplish through action. Memory. You may know that there are two types of memory. There's natural memory. This is the memory that arises out of the direct influence of external stimuli. This is probably what we most recognize as memory. Then there's meditated memory. This is the use of aids or signs to go beyond the limits of psychological functions given by nature. Early signs of operation in children. Children were asked, this is an experiment that Vygotsky goes over in his book to help show the importance of aids and the effect that they have on the education of children. He goes over a 3-year-old child and a 13-year-old girl. Children are asked to play, these children are asked to play a game in which they were to answer a set of questions without using certain words in their answer. And as a rule, each child was presented 3 or 4 tasks differing in the constraints placed upon answers and the kind of potential stimulus aids that they could use. In each task, the child was asked 18 questions, 7 of which had to do with color. The child was asked to answer each question promptly using a single word. There were 2 colors names that the child was forbidden to use, and no color could be used twice. Here is the experiment with the 13-year-old girl. You'll see on the right side we have the experiment without the use of aids. Here she's receiving the questions. How do you play mates? Yes. What color is your blouse? Gray. You see that on number 4 she immediately repeats herself without the help of aids, and she's immediately broken the rule that she cannot repeat the word. And she continues to do this multiple times. In 8, she even does it a 3rd time. As you can see, she does it, and she fails with multiple attempts. Let's just say that. And for the most part, she utterly failed the right side. But on the left side, you have aids, where she was given colored cards, and she uses these in this attempt to organize her thoughts. This is kind of a meditation, so to say, for her. Like, you see here on number 2, what color is the house? The house is gray. And after she looks at this, she takes the card and she flips it over and knows not to use that color anymore. And then you see the one time on number 12 where she does not look at her cards as she did in the others. She slips up. And then she immediately recognizes her error when she looks back at her cards and she's like, oh no, I've already used gray because I do not have access to it because I have it flipped over already. And this is an example of how aids can help teach or help young children organize their thoughts. And children with the aid of speech create greater possibilities. Oh, I'm sorry, I read up the wrong spot. Normal children, ages 10 to 12 years of age, recall twice as many words when the pictures were available as memory aids as they did without them. And I think there was a case of the 3-year-old that aids gave no benefit to the any kind of meditation. In fact, it was actually implied that the aids were negative factors, and that when the card in front of the child often became the answer. At the adult stage, the difference between their performance in the two tasks decreases and their tests with and without aids are nearly equal, but now on a new and higher basis. This does not mean that the behavior of adults again becomes direct and natural. The behavior remains meditated, but at this stage it is internalized. The external aids that school children require has been transformed into an internal sign produced by the adults as a means of remembering. The series of tasks applied to people of different ages shows how the experimental forms of meditation or meditative behavior develops. So in elementary children, you would want to use these aids. These would be pretty crucial in helping your students guide their thoughts in order to develop the connections they need. But as they get a little older, they're able to do these without aids because they're able to internalize it and do the aids in their head. So they never actually lose the need for the aids. It's just they're able to do them in their head now. The very essence of human memory consists in the fact that human beings actively remember with the help of signs. It may be said that the basic characteristics of human behavior in general is that humans personally influence their relations with the environment, and through that environment personally change their behavior, subjugating it to their control. And finally, something that's directly involved to education. The zone of proximal development. I'm sure you're all aware of what this is. It is the interaction between learning and development. The zone of proximal development is the difference between what a learner can do without help and what he or she can do with help. Vygotsky believed what children can do with the assistance of others might be, in some sense, even more indicative of their mental development than what they could do alone. The state of a child's mental development can be determined only by the clarifying its two levels, the actual developmental level and the zone of proximal development. And one example he gave an example of two children. I think he said that they were both on an 8th grade developmental level, and that they were equal on this developmental level, but when given the proper help and instruction, the developmental levels diverged. One child had a higher developmental level and was able to work on a 12th grade level, while the other only managed a 9th grade level. And this is an example of the zone of proximal development. What the kids were doing on their own was the 8th grade level, or the 8th grade level. But then with the help of the instructors, it allowed the one to move up from that 8th grade level and, I would say, excel to 4 grade levels higher. And this becomes a very important aspect of education, you might say. The idea is that the students should be challenged. They should be guided and helped into the learning. Learning is not memorizing something. It's you help me to understand what I need to know so that I can make a better connection. Don't wait for the child's development to catch up to the instruction. Use the zone of proximal development to help further the development of the child. Learning, which has traditionally been oriented towards developmental levels that have already been reached, is ineffective from the viewpoint of the child's overall development, as it does not challenge the child. It does not aim for a new stage of the developmental process, but rather lags behind the process. Thus, the notion of the zone of proximal development enables us to create a new formula, namely that the only good learning is that which is in advance of development. So if you're repeating something that you're already on the level of, you're not getting that much use out of it. I mean, there's no sense in any of us going back to 12th grade science class because we've already reached that level of development. And that's kind of the idea with ZPD. You want to be able to push your students and help guide them, like kind of pull them along, so to say. Vygotsky proposed that an essential feature of learning is that it creates the zone of proximal